Once upon a time, there was a shaggy graduate student who ate a lot of grilled cheese sandwiches. This was 22 years ago in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and that graduate student was me, but with hair. And and like all graduate students, or most, I was broke. I didn't have a lot of money. And in Ann Arbor, there is a fantastic deli called Zingerman's Deli, an amazing foodie haven, an amazing emporium of artisanal food. And at that time in 1991, the owner, Ari Weinswag, would travel the world. This was before we were completely obsessed with, the olive oil that we were putting on our food and needed to know exactly where our food came from and the history and the stories behind it. Ari, all those years ago, was doing this. He was traveling the world and collecting these artisanal products and bringing them back to Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor. They also made great sandwiches, so I went in hoping to get a sandwich making job. But as an MFA student writing fiction, I was not qualified to make a sandwich at Zingerman's. And so I was allowed to proofread a newsletter that Ari wrote every month, detailing these incredible travels around the world. He was the Indiana Jones of artisanal food products. And I delighted in getting to read his copy. I do remember in October of that year, there was a Spanish celebration month, and Ari had gone to Spain and come back with all these products. And in one 4-paragraph entry, he described a piece of cheese called Paramo de Guzman. And he said, quote, "It's an amazing cheese, rich, dense, and intense. It was also the most expensive cheese that Zingerman's had ever sold. And he was afraid to put it on the counter." He detailed the story of a cheesemaker in Castile on the Meseta in the highlands of Spain, who would go and milk his 100 sheep each day and bring the milk to a stable where he put it over a fire, stirred it, separated the curds and whey, created in these wheels the cheese, and then took it to his family cave. Of course, I knew no one who had a family cave, and that sort of stuck with me. So what I remember doing at the time was this cheese came in a white tin, and it was impossible just to buy a little bit of it. So you had to buy the white tin. I did not have the money to do it. So what I did was I ripped out this entry, because to me it felt like sort of the pointillistic beginning of some strange fairy tale. This lone cheesemaker in the rough highlands of Spain, pouring all his purity and love into this old family recipe and making this cheese that had come to Zingerman's Deli. And also at the time I vowed to myself that one day I would try it, because I thought that, like any pilgrimage that one goes on, you have to have a reason. They're not often good reasons, but they throw you out into the world, and they challenge you in sort of physical and spiritual ways that are unaccounted for. So flash forward to the year 2000. I am writing for a magazine. I get sent to Spain to profile Ferran Adrià, who was a very famous chef at the time, and he was in the midst of this project where he was trying to redefine food as we know it. And he was destroying sort of the old food and trying to create a new language for food, a new story for food. He would create these foams that basically looked like the foam you see on an ocean wave, and he would serve it on a plate. He would serve green foams and red foams and orange foams, and they would taste like asparagus or bone marrow or strawberries. It was radical stuff, and it was very future leaning. And I went on this assignment. I was with my friend Carlos, who was helping to translate because I don't speak Spanish. And he had a Sunday where he couldn't see us, so we had an off day. I had this little entry that I had ripped out of the newsletter all those years ago that I'd carried with me. We made a phone call ahead, and we went up to this village in Guzman to get a piece of this cheese. We flew on a short flight to Madrid and then drove 2.5 hours north into the country, cut out over what it really looks a lot like South Dakota, these highlands, and came to this little village of Guzman. Guzman has a population of 80 people. They're all roughly 80 years old. It is a crumbling, dying place. There are many of these places in Spain. We came to the village, and this cheesemaker, who was named Ambrosio, was nowhere to be found. The streets were empty. It was about 100 degrees. The street was actually gooey. It was so hot. But what we found was on the north boundary of the town, there were these caves built into the hill. And we found a group of old people sitting and drinking wine from a paron, which is a decanter, a glass decanter that they drink their wine from there. And you hold it up and you arc the wine into your mouth. So they shared some wine with us, which we immediately poured all over ourselves, and then pointed us 2 caves down to Ambrosio's cave, the cheesemaker's cave. We knocked on Ambrosio's door, and he answered with this booming voice. He said, "Venga, come in." And that began a 12-year project where this guy basically usurped my life. He is a 260-pound force of nature. He's easily the best storyteller I've ever met. He's sort of Mardi Gras at the funeral. He sings more loudly than anyone in the bar. He will laugh more loudly. He will cry harder than anybody. And he invited Carlos and myself into his cave. The cave complex, actually, comes from the title and is relevant to today's conversation. There's a cave deep underneath, and then above it there's a little room. These rooms are called telling rooms, and this is where the families in the village would come to gather and eat, share stories, food, wine, tell their secrets and their dreams and their histories. This was a very sacred place, and for somebody who had come to Spain from America, where there aren't many sacred spaces to tell stories, I was entranced by Ambrosio's telling room. And in this room, he told me stories about Manuel, who could fly in the village, a man who could literally fly, and everybody took it as gospel. His grandfather, who had drowned in a vat of red wine, and a distant murder that had occurred during the Spanish Civil War, which was the darkest secret of the village. On that day, though, he told me the story of this cheese. He said that he hated to disappoint us, but there would be no cheese to eat. As his cheese became famous, as it appeared in places like Zingerman's, Ambrosio had seen this cheese gain a certain amount of fame. The King and Queen of Spain had eaten this cheese and declared it the finest cheese they'd had. They passed it on to the royal family of England. It was given to serve to Frank Sinatra and Julio Iglesias. It was given to Ronald Reagan as a gift. All going back to this man in a stable making this cheese with what he said was the purity and love that he had to share with the world. Fidel Castro finally tried to buy all of Ambrosio's cheese. And as the business grew, Ambrosio, who had no business bone in his body, enlisted his best friend, a guy named Julian, to come in and help him with a move across the fields to a little stone factory. Julian came and would bring contracts to Ambrosio. Ambrosio would sign them without looking. And it turned out, as Ambrosio said on that first day in the telling room, that Julian had put a contract in front of him which he signed, and which had signed away his rights to this company. And Ambrosio then was plotting to kill his best friend Julian in that moment that we had walked in. I was just there for some cheese and had walked into the middle of a murder plot. That visit then turned into literally those 12 years of returning to Guzman to try to understand what was really happening there. Part of the tension was whether or not Ambrosio was going to kill Julian. And what I found out over the years was he continued to repeat this story. And every time he did, he was killing Julian in his mind, which as a storyteller made me very curious about the effect of story, the power of story, the way story defines good and evil for us, the social value and the history that gets claimed when we tell these stories. And Ambrosio, as a master storyteller, he was the history keeper. He was the teller of this village. He was the one who kept it alive. One thing that also happened was that I abandoned all my journalistic instincts. I became very close to Ambrosio. He became someone who I depended on. And when I was in the telling room, I felt like a child again. I was being told a story. Time ceased. And it was this sort of magical suspension that I found myself in. I think as a normal journalist, you probably go on the second day and you ask Julian to tell his side of the story. But it took me 6 years to get to Julian because we became so connected. This place was so radically different from my crazy deadline life. I could hear myself think. I could relish these stories. I could listen to stories that took hours, days, in some cases years to tell. There was, at some point, though, when I had to bring this book down to earth, a moment where I realized that Ambrosio and I were engaged in a narrative battle. He thought I had come to faithfully write down his story, and I had to tell my own truth eventually. So what he did, though, was at the very end of a summer when I was living there with my family, he had 1 tin of cheese left. And we were in the telling room. It was a day in September. We were about to leave. And I was about to become very implicated in this relationship between Ambrosio and Julian, and get sucked very deep into a world that I wasn't quite aware of before I'd gotten there. But in this one moment, he decided that he was going to give me the ending of what he thought should be my book. This ending I'm going to read from comes with, there's another 100 pages after, which describe the battle that took place beyond it. But in this moment, there was this one last tin of cheese. He pulled it out in the telling room this day. I had waited 12 years to try the cheese, and so I just thought I would. I just thought I'd read from this triumphant moment that should have been the ending of Ambrosio's story had I faithfully transcribed it that way. How do you begin to describe a moment for which you've waited a small eternity, thinking it was never to be? How do you downplay such a consummation? Inside, I was turning cartwheels, doing the Watusi, soft shoeing with a vaudeville smile, while outside, my ersatz Castilian stoicism crumbled. Wow, 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 I repeated as Ambrosio watched and grinned, saying nothing. Oh, it was a strong cheese, a Herculean cheese. You could tell that immediately, tangy and tart, melting and then flaring again. With the first crumble, it spread slowly in lava flow across the palatable landscape, tasting of minerals and luscious buttercream, of chamomile and thyme. It tasted of flour and dirt, manure and nectar, and perhaps of love and hate too. A gustatory alert went up and my whole mouth was watering and alive, awakened from Van Winkle slumber and emergency ready. This was a cheese that, like its master, sharply caught you unawares, lovingly provoked you while assuming your submission, and then its richness overwhelmed all previous thoughts, tastes, memories. I now understood, if vaguely, how the cheese must have created a conduit to the past. For its concentration was a force, an energy, a momentum, the psychic drill bit boring a wormhole in this Castilian space-time continuum. Thank you.